Okay, welcome everyone to just one more page, suspense writing in WLW, or Women Who Love Women, genre fiction. Very excited for this panel. My name is Marlena Chertok. I am the OutWrite co-chair along with Malik Thompson, and I will just be sharing a short message from our sponsors and then getting out of the way so our wonderful panelists can take the stage. So bear with me as I share my screen.
My name is Paul Ramos. I'm an MA, Medical Assistant PCS2, and I've been in a company for 5 years. I choose to work in AHF to carry the heart and soul for my dad, my late dad. He was diagnosed with HIV and AIDS. Every time I see a patient, I know that he's looking over me and he knows that I did it for him.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Zoraida Jiménez y soy la manager de práctica de la oficina de Falls Church in Virginia. So what has surprised me more about the company culture is my immediate manager taking her time to really train me one-on-one, making sure that I understand and I do the job that I need to do to succeed in my role.
Hi, my name is Simply Sandy. I'm a non-medical case manager here at the K Street location. I chose to work at AHF because it is a phenomenal company. The company allowed me to spread my wings, if you will. They allowed me to continue doing what I love to do, and that's serving the public. I feel as though we are a family, and I could not do what I do by myself.
My name is Dominique Damaro. I'm the office administrator for the Temple Hills AHF location. I choose to work for AHF because I like to give back to my community. My favorite thing about working with AHF is how much the organization gives to the community, how they help our patients, help them grow, the tools that they give them that our patients can't find at any other clinic.
The thing that surprised me about working for AHF, which I enjoyed, the teamwork, the employees. It's a really great work environment. You look forward to actually getting up and coming to work. AHF is one of those companies that I will say that really looks out and really cares about their employees.
My name is Sade. I'm a technician here in Baltimore, and I work with AHF because I really enjoy taking care of my patients, and I like their mission statement of being patient first, of putting patient care over profit, and getting our co-pays as close to zero as possible. I love that part.
The average baseball stadium holds about 50,000 people, enough to fill a dance floor the size of a New York City block. It was also the number of people in the US who became HIV positive every year since 2003. Then, something happened. One by one, we said, enough is enough. Instead of waiting for a cure, we took action. We got tested and retested. We talked to each other, and we talked to healthcare providers about HIV prevention options. People living with HIV started treatment right away and stuck to it, which can prevent the spread of HIV through sex. New infections went down, but we still have work to do. So let's all do our part and keep fighting, because together we can all help stop the virus. Find out what you can do at helpstopthevirus.com.
All right, and without further ado, over to the panelists.
Thank you, Marlena. Welcome to Just One More Page, a panel on suspense writing in women loving women genre fiction. We are the Feisty FOES, a group of queer writers who love to write and talk about writing. And we're all in attendance today, which is, I don't know, maybe one for the record books. I'm excited to moderate this panel, and just a little bit in a different way, I've asked each writer to take a few minutes to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their latest work. We'll also be putting detailed information and links to our websites and things like that in the chat bar. But for a more detailed bio, you can go to the OutWrite authors page. I'll go ahead and get us started. I'm Meredith Doench. I am a queer writer of the Luce Hansen thriller series, and most recently, the standalone thriller Whereabouts Unknown from Bold Strokes Books. I am an English professor at the University of Dayton in Ohio. And just a little bit about Whereabouts Unknown, it came out in March, and it features the lesbian homicide detective from Dayton, Theodora Madsen. She's in the prime of her life with a woman and a job that she loves and a baby on the way. But she's shot in a routine follow-up to a cold case about a missing teen, and it's unclear if her injuries will be career-ending or not. While she's recovering, she uncovers another case in Brecksville, Ohio, of a missing teen with similar circumstances to her cold case. And there's an added complication with that teen that she is without her medication for lupus, and there are concerns she could be pregnant. So Theo is 100% convinced these two teens could be together, possibly still alive, and their situation is growing more dire by the minute. So Theo just sort of goes after it with all she's got. That's Whereabouts Unknown. I'll pass it off to MB.
Okie doke. I'm MB Austin. I have written a number of contemporary thrillers with the Magi Rios series, set in various lovely locales, Spain and Sitka and Long Island. And they're about a covert operator who always tries to take a vacation and never gets to take one because work always intrudes. So they have to do with fighting the mob and keeping people from getting killed and kidnappings and the theft of big sums of money and things like that. I am currently working on something completely different, which is it's called Blursday's Revenge. It will be out next fall from Bywater Books. It is a mid-pandemic mystery, but it is not a culinary cozy because the culinary part of it is very icky. And it has a lot of humor, but it is dark humor because these are mid-pandemic dark humor times. And it has a amateur sleuth who is over 50, gender non-conforming lesbian.
Excellent. We'll just kind of go around. Elle, you're next on my screen.
Darn, I was last on my screen. I'm Elle E, and I am a bisexual author who writes women-loving women fiction for DSP Publications. I have 9 books currently in print, including the Stormfront series and the Nearly Parted series and several standalones. My most recent book came out on Tuesday, and that is Harsh Reality. Uses a lot of suspense because we've got an Old West female sheriff who is suddenly transported to modern day. So you've got the whole tension of the fish out of water thing, how's she going to navigate that far into the future? But you've also got a situation where she only has a week before the reality show that she's accidentally cast on closes up filming, and she has to stop the evil before that time comes because her opportunity will be ended. So that's Harsh Reality. Sadly, I can't show you the cover because it just came out and I haven't received mine yet, but that's me.
Sounds excellent. Thank you. What about you, Mari?
Laurie, and I have problems finding the mute button on Zoom screen even after several years of doing this. But I am a speculative short fiction writer and poet. For this particular thing, hi, this won the 2021 OutWrite fiction chapbook contest. So I'm still very excited about this. This is from last year. And it's a collection of tiny little short stories. I know there were some issues with it in the online book room, but you can order it directly from Neon Hemlock. So that was my excitement. And I also have a couple of other books, essay collection, poetry novella. And with that, I live in Florida. There is a cat who is pushing my wheelchair at the moment. So if I roll out of view, it's the cat, not me. Just want to make sure everybody's aware of this. And with that, I'll head to the next person.
Not a ghost.
Not a ghost.
It is, and this is, I wanted to kill the suspense immediately before people. It is definitely, he wants to play in the chair, which he's not supposed to do when I'm in it.
Awesome. What about you, Riley?
Hello, I'm Riley Scott. I'm excited to be here with you all tonight. And I write women loving women romance published by Bella Books. I currently have 6 standalone novels out, all featuring strong, amazing women who fall for equally strong, amazing women. My writing often, features themes of mental health, personal growth, along with humor, and of course, love. So my latest is Take Your Shot. It was my first young adult novel, and it's set in my hometown of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm currently working on a second chance slow burn that's definitely been a lot of fun, and wanted to mention that today because that kind of inherently ties into the suspense topic that we're talking about.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Riley. Yeah, I mean, we're all writing in different genres. Some of us overlap in some ways, which is, I think, kind of interesting. But one of the things that we all share is writing suspense. And so I'm going to kind of pick out Riley and Elle, because you both seem to do a little bit more with the romance than some of the others, right? And how does suspense play like a really vital role for you? Either.
I'll go first.
Okay,
for me, it's anywhere from a half to a third of the plot material. So the romance, not necessarily suspense, but I love it because it gives me a third. How do I put this? I always have 3 things going on at any given time. I've got, your exterior action conflict, because I write action heroines, and I've got that interior drama, whatever subconscious or emotional issue the character's working on that's going to build a second area of tension and suspense. And then I've got that romance, and that romance is just great for giving me one more channel to funnel suspense and tension into. And so it gives me one more way to play with it and keep the reader, hopefully, on the edge of their seat from 3 different directions. And I love to just kind of rotate the 3 lines with as much suspense as possible. So I just love having that extra outlet that romance adds to give me another opportunity to use that suspense factor.
And I'd say a lot is similar for me. I don't typically have a bunch of action or mystery or anything like that also going on. So a lot of times when people hear romance, they don't necessarily think suspense, but in and of itself, falling in love is terrifying and mysterious, and you're having to answer all those questions like, am I the only person feeling this, or am I moving too fast? Is this a smart idea? There are all of those things going on inside of our minds when we're falling in love in general. So I think that not having that suspense would make a really kind of open and shut romance. So you do still have that, will they, won't they? In addition to, the personal growth and whatever emotional struggle they're going through that Elle just said, that's always tied in there too. And that's usually something that's holding someone back from, embracing that romance. So I think that there definitely is still a lot of suspense. It's what drives the story and builds that tension. And you can't really have that chemistry without some of that suspense. So I definitely think that it's still vital in the romance genre.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what keeps the reader turning the pages to find out what's going to happen with it, right?
Absolutely.
Mari, I think that you're sort of in this mix. I know for sure MB is, and maybe even Elle in like crime writing. I'm not sure, Mari, if you fit into this or not. I'm definitely in this category too. But I was wondering from MB in particular, like, how do you think crime fits in with suspense, or how does it work with your writing?
I think it's integral. Clearly in the the overarching suspense is anybody going to get killed? Is somebody going to get away with this? You know, it's the stakes are life or death. So it's very simple to see sort of what the big picture question is about. And then, as with Riley and Elle's, there are those questions about the personal relationships and the character's journey, because you got to care about your main characters and what their journey is. And their whole journey isn't just not getting shot or not getting blown up or not having somebody else get shot or blown up. You know, it's about something else, or it's a one-note action. And those layers are, I think, what makes the readers care, because they're invested in the characters and they don't want the characters to get killed, but they also want them to have some measure of happiness. So that's where you get all the other things playing into the characters being whole people who are at the same time, you know, getting shot at. Not blown up.
Turn of the page almost. Yeah. Especially with mine. All right. What about you, Elle?
I would say that the two books that I have that play most into the crime and solving a crime would be the Real to Real Love, which is a standalone, where, you know, that even I didn't know who did it until I got to the very end and figured it out myself. I laid lots of clues and hints and such, but I hadn't made a final decision. And thank goodness for my writing group who helped me figure out which one should have done it. But, you know, and so the reader doesn't know until the very end, I hope. As opposed to Dead Woman's Pond, which is a little different approach, because the reader knows right away, and the suspense and the tension comes from, can the characters figure it out, and can they figure it out before they end up victims themselves? So two different approaches to solving a mystery, one where the reader knows up front and one where the reader doesn't, but there's still going to be a lot of suspense and tension. It's just, where is it placed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love how you were talking about how you as the writer didn't necessarily know who the killer was, right? Because if it's suspenseful for us as we're writing, it's definitely going to be more suspenseful for the reader. And so I have found myself in that place a lot, especially with my last book, of not knowing exactly who does the killing or how they do it even. That was one of the things that I struggled with. So I think that's really interesting. You know, how many writers don't know as they're writing versus, you know, kind of how many do. Mari, I don't know if you fit in this category with your writing. What would you say?
So I use mystery a little bit. I actually have written some crime stories that fit in with science fiction, but I don't always let people know that they're crimes until we get later on in the story. And there is one story that I wrote is more about what happens after the crime. This is Labyrinth. Definitely, this is a story of how that particular group of people chooses to punish the people that are doing their crimes. Very often, because of what I'm writing, I decide not to solve the mystery at all. I like to keep it mysterious, and that's the whole point. Is not necessarily for me to solve that particular element, but to see what people are doing with it or not doing with it. Sometimes they do solve it. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes there's a crime element, sometimes there isn't. So it really varies from story to story to story. My stories with outright murders tend to be a lot of fun, but my goal is not always to focus on who did it as much as what happens to everybody involved afterwards.
Oh, that's interesting. All right, so it's kind of about the justice part of it, right?
Justice, and yes, also injustice.
Injustice, okay.
A lot of it is, how are we responding? I have my big story dealing with this is Trickster, which was published by Clark's World some time ago, which is very much of how are we dealing with the death, and that story went into unexpected places, as many stories do, and it does have one of those unexpected places was, oh yes, and now there's a murder, but that wasn't necessarily the chief focus of the story, and I'm not sure it is the chief focus of the story. It's just, hey, and then there's a murder, and now let's focus on everything else.
What about you, Riley? Do any of your books kind of fit into this category?
Not really. I mean, I occasionally utilize injustice, kind of that quest for justice that I think, inherently draws us in because that our brains want to find that resolution. But I don't typically include, I mean, crime and injustice have found their way into a couple, but it's not usually my go-to.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Bambi.
and writing and having your characters be up against something that is wrong, that is unjust, that is a challenge that needs to be fixed, whatever. It doesn't have to be criminal.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's about creating conflict and putting your characters in situations where your readers really want to root for them. And that can be in all kinds of areas of life. I mean, most of us every day as individuals aren't dealing with crimes, so we can relate to all the non-criminal stuff pretty well.
Absolutely.
Workplaces particularly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And all of us are working with some level of a relationship happening in our books, right? Like different phases, and they might not necessarily be categorized as romance, but there's elements of relationships which cause conflict and bring in all that, right? Yeah, excellent. Anybody else have anything to say about that? One of the things I've been thinking a lot about since we kind of put together our topic and our topic of suspense is there's this really delicate level of like trust between the writer and the reader when it comes to suspense, right? Like even though we just said that like some of us don't actually know who did it, the reader trusts that we do and trusts that we know the story and that we're going to tell it in a way that's going to come to fruition in some way for us, right? And so there's this delicate balance of like telling too much or not telling enough, like withholding information that really a reader might need. And I kind of think that all plays into the suspense element. Anybody want to take on that? And how do you know how much is too much to tell, or how do you build it without giving too much away?
Well, I know in one story that came out fairly recently, my story in Apex, I let people know what was happening through the cups of coffee. And if you were reading very, very carefully, you could follow the cups of coffee and tell what was and find out what had happened at the end. So there are different ways of being sneaky. Because the cups of coffee, of course, don't seem particularly important. The character just keeps saying, I need more coffee, I need more coffee. And it's like, okay, but pay attention to how many coffees the character has brought into the room. That gives you a clue as to what happened at the end. So I think there's a lot of interesting ways to do it in the sense, but having said that, I found that a number of people didn't follow the cups of coffee and didn't care. And so, which is why I'm bringing up that example, because you can spend a lot of time very carefully going through and checking, okay, how many cups of coffee do I have? I went through and, I checked like every other paragraph, what's going on with the coffee. And it was lost on so many people who still enjoyed the story, but they did not pay any attention to the coffee. So you could try sometimes to have little things like that in the background. And that I think I tend to do a lot of that largely because even though I write speculative fiction, I read a lot of mystery, and mysteries love to do that. They love to put in these little clue of whatever it is. And oh, that's what that meant. And it's a technique I love. So if you can.
Yeah. I want to jump on that one too. I think that the one reason why readers are sometimes disappointed is because the resolution seems to come out of nowhere. And it's vital that an author, if they're going to hide that resolution until the resolution, it's vital that they be laying those little breadcrumbs that even if the reader doesn't pick them up necessarily along the way, they will think at the end, oh yeah, wait, I saw something about that. I remember that now that you're telling me what's happened. It's when I figured out who the murderer was, I realized subconsciously I had laid some of it, but I did have to go back in and hide a few more hints so that it wouldn't seem like it came out of nowhere. I think also it's one thing that comes into play with reader expectations is, of course, how the book is marketed. And, I ran into some issues with Dead Woman's Pond because one website had marketed it as mystery. And so the reader expected to not know who the killer was until the end of the book. And so when they found out early on, they were disappointed because reader expectation wasn't fulfilled.
Right.
And the websites that had marketed it as what it was, which is paranormal romance, it didn't bother them. There were no, comments along the lines of disappointment. They actually expected to know fairly soon because they weren't expecting a mystery to solve. They were expecting two characters to cheer for on their adventure. So yeah, that's something that a writer has to really consider is how are you going to label it? What genre are you going to slot it into? Or combination of genres in my case, because if you choose the wrong one, it can play against you.
Yeah.
I would say that this is what
we lost Mari.
Yeah, we
froze a little bit.
Things have frozen in Florida.
Not here.
Not
Things are
everywhere.
never frozen in Florida. I'll message her. Somebody else jump.
Okay. I was gonna say that I think the key to sort of reader satisfaction, regardless of the genre, is that something that you've seeded at the beginning makes the end make sense. Whether it is romance and you could see the foundations of why it would make sense for, that I'll let Riley in particular speak to, twists and turns in romance, but in every story, there's obstacles for your characters to overcome, and how they overcome them is a lot of the suspense. And seeing how they do that at the end, if it comes out of nowhere, whether it's romance or suspense or mystery or any other genre, the readers are just like, what? Why did you throw that in? That's so cheap. That doesn't make sense. That's not plausible. That's not in keeping with the characters. So you have to work stuff in. Like you could start at the end and figure out at the beginning, what do we need to seed for any kind of story?
Absolutely.
Mari's back.
Oh, Mari.
Yeah, sorry about that. The great suspense of my life is, will my internet actually be working or not working? Chances are good it's going to flicker out again. As a complete off note here, our cable company refuses to believe that we lose internet connections in the rain. So, sorry.
Excellent. Riley, were you going to say something?
I was going to just kind of, go off of what MB had just said. I think that in my writing, I am very much a character-driven pantser. And so I relate really hard to what Elle said there about, sometimes you don't know. I mean, I know I write romance. The genre demands a happily ever after or a happy for now. So I know where it's going. The getting there. So I think my strategy really is I let it happen as it happens. It doesn't always happen the way that I want it to. And that's one of the most frustrating things as a writer, is when your characters are doing what feels true to them, but not how you would orchestrate it. But so in that, I really try to make sure that I'm staying true to the characters and laying that groundwork. Because since it is character driven, that groundwork's already there to how they're going to react to those situations, to how that suspense is going to build, to what's going to hold them back. But I also do think that a really important step in my process is, since I don't always know where it's going, making sure that after I've written it, I go back through and I read it through the lens of the reader. Sometimes stuff is just in my head and never made it to the page, so it makes complete sense to me. So I have to make sure that sometimes I go back in and I see things that I could put more, kind of a longer lead into explaining. And then I sometimes find things where I've already laid some breadcrumbs that I can then, expand upon. But making sure, I think the trust with the reader really comes in there, making sure they can actually see what's going on in your head. If someone who didn't think this up has no idea what's going on, they're going to lose interest in the story. So I think just making sure that it's actually on the page somewhere in those little breadcrumbs.
And I do something similar, except I will read it back through the lens of each character, each of the two main characters. I really try to put myself in each of the two main characters' heads and make sure that what they're doing feels authentic to that character. Because as a reader, nothing frustrates me more than when a character does something that feels completely out of character and the writer in me starts screaming, up, that's the writer needing the character to do this or that because that's where the plot needs to go, dang it. And the characters really wouldn't behave that way as they have been written up to that point. So I really try hard to make sure that what my characters are doing logically and organically flows from how they have behaved up until that point.
Yeah, I was going to add that I think the past is really important with that, because so much of the suspense on the main character or any of the characters, right, about whether they're going to, there's going to be some sort of growth or change with them, has to do with how they've reacted to similar situations in the past and failed. And now they're up against something that hopefully this time it's going to be different, right? But yeah, I think that the past kind of plays in with that as well too. I know a lot of us use kind of like environmental settings and things like that that kind of feed into the suspense that's going on. Like Mari, I'm particularly thinking of you, and Elle. Like, how does that help to ratchet up suspense? It could be, weather, it could be, setting, environmental issues, any of those kinds of things.
So one of the fun things about working within speculative fiction is you can do so many things with your setting. So I can have the setting be outer space where the question is how can you get the power back on? Do you have enough food? Do you have enough water? Do you have enough air? And how do you deal with any of those really basic necessities, which allows you to focus into the suspense of those necessities. In terms of the environmental fiction, I have a piece coming out later this month where I hesitate. I wasn't thinking of it in context of this panel because it's not overly suspenseful in the sense that it's talking about the past. But the element of suspense there, and of something that's already happened, the element of the suspense there is to figure out what exactly I'm talking about. And I did mention the mystery and all that kind of stuff. The mysterious element is, this is a story told solely through footnotes. And so the idea is you read through the footnotes and try to get a sense of what the actual story is and what has been going on. And it is a very environmental story. It is about pollution in Lake Apopka and some other stuff with that, which I'm going to throw out this thought before I lose internet again and before I forget it. But there's also a way of building suspense in the sense of what sort of telling are you using? Are you using flashbacks? Are you using the footnotes? Are you using a straightforward telling, but are there different literary techniques you can use to keep the reader guessing, keep the reader wanting to know what's going on? I know that many of us in this group have used flashbacks, which are very powerful, very something that's very expected, where it's like, oh, so that's what the character had in, or that was something that was going on in the back. Shifting timescapes, shifting things, or, my little thing of, writing through footnotes, and saying, okay, now we're revealing what happened in this article and in this report.
I love using unusual settings. Real to Real Love is set on a cruise ship in space for a good chunk of it. And again, as Mari said, that means you're isolated, your resources are limited. If something happens to you, it's going to take time for help to get to you. It takes on another level of tension and suspense because the love interest is a tangible hologram who is literally tied to the ship. And so she, if something happens to the power source that produces her existence, then she ceases to exist. So it's definitely a source of suspense and tension when power outages start to occur or her electronics become damaged. In Dead Woman's Pond, it was unusual for me because the setting kind of took on a role as an antagonist. The pond itself almost became a character as it drew people to it with the intent of drowning them. And again, that will build suspense, because every time the character gets anywhere near the lake, that tension ratchets up, because that it has this ability to draw people to their death. And so it's central to the town. So you're going to come by it relatively frequently. So yeah, I love to play with setting. I love to play with structure, but I think we're going to hit on that a little later. But I have a lot to say there too. I talk too much, I know.
I'm sorry for getting us off that nice streamlined, but this is the fun of structure. The structure can surprise you. And, you can suddenly shoot into a different road. Yes.
We can totally go into structure though. Let's do it. Let's mix it up. Anybody? Well, how about Riley? Do you have some thoughts on structure?
No, I was actually gonna
okay.
comment on, kind of the music, the settings, the weather. I think that, really also those little elements that you can pull in to really set an atmosphere. I think they play really well in romance too. Because especially amping up that chemistry, there are some settings and some weather that just inherently sparks that romantic feel, or puts people into that situation, whether they're holding themselves back or not. So it really kind of amps up that, will they, won't they, what's happening here? This is now a charged moment. So I think that utilizing those kind of background areas and helping them bring the story to life is something that I really love doing.
Oh no, it's very cold. We must cuddle together for warmth. What else can we do to stay alive?
Exactly. I mean, you got to be careful to use them and not make them too cheesy, but they happen in real life too. I mean, those situations do inherently happen when two people are close and are falling for each other. So, it's fun to add them.
I love those moments. They're never too cheesy for me. I've never seen you use that particular one, I don't think, but
I haven't, but I mean, that Second Chance Slow Burn is going to have a lot of those moments. So
there you go.
Excellent. I like using weather too, to kind of like with mystery. And I'm particularly thinking of like the very first book I wrote, which was Crossed. It was in this frigid, freezing, like the coldest weather they've had in like years. And so, everything had like this frozen over glaze to it. And the truth was underneath that somehow. They had to crack through that to get to it. But I've also written about settings that are, extraordinarily hot, like a situation where the weather's too, like something that they've not experienced, and tried to work with those. And I think that those can really add to the suspense as well, too. When you put people into situations that they might not have experienced comfort-wise, that can kind of push them in ways to behave in ways that they might not.
Those are good for romance too. Oh, it's so hot, I must take something off.
Yes.
Weather is very versatile.
All right, so Mari, let's go into structure. What do you think about that?
I love it. This is like my obsession, is playing with structure, doing unusual things with structure. The problem is if you get too involved in this, and I can tell you this from my own experience, you can have problems writing a straightforward story because you're having so much fun with, oh, look, I can write a story in tweets. I can write it backwards so that you can read it backwards and forwards, and either this is really fun. I can write a story in footnotes. I can do, and then you're like, oh, right, how do I write an extra story? But there's a lot of fun there in terms of trying to keep up when you're doing this different structure. You're surprising the reader with the structure, but you also have to make sure that the reader wants to read through the entire structure. And that with the story I just mentioned being told in tweets, I had to make it mysterious as to how we got to the most recent tweet, because you are reading, since it is told in Twitter format, you read the most recent tweet first and you go down. And there is okay, how do you make this suspenseful? Well, you actually have to start with a mystery and work down and have the mystery solved at the end. And that's fun and it's great. And you can have all kinds of things work with you. You can tell stories in all kinds of different order, and you can break narrative forms. So I'm a little obsessed, and I get a little overexcited over this. But as you can see, it is a technique that can lead to dangerous problems like not being able to write normal stories. So use with caution, as fun as it is.
I agree. It's super fun. Yeah. Anybody else?
I love to play with structure. I hate to play with structure. There's this like really annoying writer inside this writer that's like, ooh, let's try something challenging. It'll be fun. Let's take this on. And then halfway through it, I'm like, I am never doing this again, ever. And then the next book comes along and I'm like, ooh, but there's this other cool, yeah. So for Threadbare, I tried intertwining two POVs so that I could build suspense and tension in both, except that one is set in present day and one is set in the past. And I had to make the alternating points of view. I had to make the one from the past meet the one from the present at the halfway point of the book. And I ended up scrapping about 10,000, 20,000 words because one was here and one was here, but they needed to be here. And it just, yeah. And that's that. This is the penalty for being a pantser, because I suppose if I were a plotter, that wouldn't have happened, right? All the pantsers out there are like, yeah, we understand that. And all the plotters are like, that's what you get. But yeah, so it was an incredible, it was fun. I actually didn't mind that much, but it was the hardest book that I've ever written. I hope it accomplished its goal in that, you were never without tension, because as soon as the tension started to ease in timeline A, the tension is ratcheting up in timeline B, and you've got to get through this chapter to get back to what is going on in timeline A. So I found that really fun to play with those alternating tensions. And I'm sure the readers hated me at times. It's like, well, now I've got to read a whole chapter in this one to get back to what, well, but wait, this one's really interesting, but I don't know. Okay, so yeah, I love torturing my characters and my readers. Hopefully it was successful, but man, it was a pain.
Oh yeah, I had a similar situation with Whereabouts Unknown, where I had Theo's, the detective story, moving like in chronological order. And then I had Annabelle, who was held captive. Hers is moving backward in time. And same thing, like I had to have a meeting spot where they eventually meet up, but finding that meeting spot was so hard. And I don't know how many drafts that went through to get it to the one spot that I wanted, that was best for them to cross over. But it does create really great suspense, I think.
Yeah, it's fun too. It's fun when it's done. It's fun when it's done.
And I think what you're saying also relates to point of view, because all the stuff you're doing with structure is hiding some of what somebody knows and what somebody is telling and what the reader is learning, maybe at different times than the characters are learning. And I love unreliable narrators. And I do wonder if we'll ever see a romance with an unreliable narrator.
I don't know. I think Vic is kind of an unreliable narrator because she believes that she can't love or be loved, but the reader knows from page 5 that she's totally capable of both. And I definitely tried to play her that way. Of course, eventually she becomes a reliable narrator.
Which on the romance side, Riley, would you say that there's always an element of unreliability to multiple narrators?
I think that there might be. I always utilize multiple points of view because I think that for the romance, that really gives you this like look at what everyone's going through. And a lot of times that main character or one of the main characters isn't really completely honest with themselves at first. Like you can clearly see what they're going through and where they need to go, but it's that struggle of them getting there themselves. So yeah, I think that to some degree in romance, there are at least parts where they're unreliable. We see a lot of people who deny their own feelings and everything like that. But yeah, like you were saying, on the multiple points of view, I think that really gives you a fun way to flip it back and forth and see the situation from either perspective, and how they can totally take two different things away from an interaction, but it really drives up that suspense and that tension there too.
I mean, it's this is an extremely old example, and it's not 100% romance based, but Emma in Jane Austen, Emma is kind of a example of a very unreliable narrator. She's very confident in her own opinions and her own beliefs, but she gets everything wrong in the entire course of the book. So you can have that, and in a way that creates some of the, I don't know how suspenseful Emma really is as a novel, which is why this is perhaps not the best example of a book to be bringing into this forum, but I think Emma at least exists as an example of how you could potentially have an unreliable narrator in romance, even if none of them are coming to mind for me right now. I was trying to think of it, and then Emma popped into my mind. I thought that's not really classic romance, so I don't know if we can count that.
But having a character who's a little bit in denial, which is a lot of what the unreliability is, both in romance, and I think that carries over also into mystery and thrillers and anything where there's danger, so
Absolutely.
Yeah, they can't clearly see their situation, or they can't, or they have a judgment about what they can do that's not accurate.
Yeah.
With their bodies, or
to have those moments where they say, "No, don't."
Yes.
No, you're not really gonna do that.
No. Those are the best suspense moments right there, where the reader is screaming, "I know what's gonna happen. That is really stupid. Don't do it." Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are great.
And that fine edge of not, having your competent kick-ass characters, and still making them do something that they just is unreasonably risky in some way, and prevail, and not have your readers go, "That's just ridiculous,"
or just unbelievably foolish because they just don't realize.
Yeah.
When you're building those competent kick-ass characters, it's so vital that you give them an area where they're not so competent and kick-ass.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to talk about Vic is, she is kick-ass, but emotionally she's a hot mess. So, if she's going to make her mistakes, that's where she's going to make them, and they're going to impact everything else. And again, the reader can see where she is going to place a foot wrong. They, an emotional foot wrong. They know exactly what she's going to screw up, but she can't see it. And I think that characters who are built with flaws create so much more suspense and tension for the reader than the ones that are just a little too perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, we have about 10 minutes left or so, but what are some methods that you all use to create suspense that could work for any writer of any genre? Like, what are just some ideas about creating suspense in writing?
I like working with ordinary objects, and as odd as that seems for somebody who's doing science fiction and fantasy, I think in many ways, the more ordinary, the more usual the object, the more suspense you can build out of that. Stephen King does this all the time. I am really only going with extremely well-known established authors for all of my examples here, which is really terrible, particularly for a panel that is supposed to be celebrating some lesser-known queer writers and all this kind of fun stuff. But really, it struck me very much when you are using in Pet Sematary, much of the suspense comes from a cat. Ordinary cat, which leads you into the rest of the book. I like doing things with coffee. I like doing things, with coffee cups. I'm thinking of other things that really went for, coffee to coffee cups, and just small minor objects, because it grounds the reader, grounds you, but it also allows, and especially if you are writing horror, The more ordinary the object, the more horrific it can become, because that's something that's right next to you. So if you are talking about the wallpaper, yeah, we all work with wallpaper. We've all seen it. We go into buildings that have wallpaper. You know what it is. And oh, sure, it looks ordinary. Think of what you can do with it. Think of that wallpaper turning and doing something. Yes, I do have a story coming out that has evil wallpapers. If you were wondering where this comes from. So yes, you can have this. Have fun stuff with lamps. Have fun stuff with coffee. Because it grounds you, and it will also help because the chances are really good that your reader has coffee or wallpaper or scissors or any little tiny ordinary thing really close by. Let's make it scary.
I love it. I love to play with ticking clocks. I love to play with enclosed environments that you can't get out of easily. I love end of chapter hooks, even if it's something as simple as, and then the phone rang, because you're going to want to know who's on the phone. One of the techniques I used that was, again, one of those things where I was kicking myself about halfway through was when I had just an internal thought from one of the two characters at the beginning of every chapter. I am blah, 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 or the other character saying Vic is blah, blah, blah. And it would set the tone for how the chapter was going to go. And if you saw a first thought of, Vic is broken at the beginning of the chapter, something is going to go very, very bad in that chapter. And it sets that tension from the get-go, and the reader's going to want to read that chapter to see, why is she broken? What happened? Why did she break? I love playing with those. It was a real pain about 2/3 of the way through. I'm like, okay, I've already used this one. I need to come up with a new one, but it was fun. And I ended up using it for all 3 books, again, kicking myself because now it's a trilogy and I reused some of the same opening thoughts, but it was fun when it was finished. So, but I love doing those things.
I love the end of the chapter thing too. I always think of for me, when I'm writing, it feels like the Law and Order da-dum, would happen after every chapter. Like there would be this line and then it would be da-dum, and then that's how I always think of it too.
Or the guy from, I don't remember which show it was, where he put on his glasses and give a quick witty, which one was that?
I don't know, but it sounds funny.
He would always put on his shades and give a quick witty one-liner, and then it would launch.
The redheaded guy in CSI. Yes.
Was it CSI Miami, or?
I think it might have been the Miami one.
Yeah, I know it was Miami because I lived there for a while, but I can't for the life of me think of the name of that show. Anyway, it was a very effective technique. I can remember the technique, but I can't remember the name.
I don't know that this is doing great for marketing that particular show. I have to say that.
No, but it is marketing the technique, because the technique stuck with me beyond the show's run. So
I'm going to default for my answer to something way, way, way basic, which is my secret for suspense. You could trademark this, you could patent it, is always make your readers care about the characters. Because after that, I think the characters can do any number of things. But as long as the readers are invested in that character getting what they want, whether it's, escaping the avalanche because the avalanche is the monster, or surviving the tsunami, or, getting across the ocean on the rowboat, or falling in love and not losing their sense of self, then I think that the readers will keep reading. I think at the minute that they stop caring, the wallpaper can just eat them. It's fine. They will root for the wallpaper instead.
I think that's very similar to my approach to MB. I think that, like I said, most of my stuff's character driven. That's just kind of how how my stories work. And so I think that having those flawed but lovable characters, lovable because they're flawed, those flawed characters are then going to take on lives of their own and create suspense, because that's just, you know, none of us really know exactly what anyone else is thinking. So within those flaws, what's going to hold them back? You know, are they going to be able to rise above their fears, conquer whatever it is that they're doing, have that growth? So I think that definitely making relatable characters that people fall in love with. So absolutely.
I'm just going to note that one of the joys of short fiction is you don't actually need to do this. One of my most popular stories from last year has no characters in it whatsoever.
Amazing.
So you can do this, but I don't need to have people care for an entire book. I only needed to have them care for 850 words. So you can do this without there, and that story does have quite a bit of suspense towards the end. It starts off not suspenseful and then gets more suspenseful at the end of the words. So there is that too, that if you're going, but I don't want to create characters that people like enjoy. You don't necessarily need this, but I do agree that in novels and television and in movies, anything that is going to be taking a much bigger chunk of the reader or the viewer's time, yeah, you've got to have somebody there that a reader will like, but not in short fiction.
It looks like we are almost out of time.
Yeah. Anybody have anything burning to say about anything we haven't covered?
Nope. Maybe we take one more second to plug our latest release.
Sure, go for it.
Harsh Reality. Harsh Reality came out Tuesday from DSP Publications. You can also get it pretty much everywhere books are sold online: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and so forth.
And I will point out that that book is a really good reason why you now have why Elle E now has the nickname of Hellfire.
Yeah, that's a long story from GCLS conference, but I really like that nickname.
I'm going to keep bringing it up forever.
Yeah.
Until it sticks.
Anybody else?
My latest Take Your Shot came out in May. It's kind of a sweet and light coming of age story between a basketball player and the editor of the school newspaper, kind of figuring out who they are and first love.
Excellent.
Mari, when are we going to see the wallpaper?
Yeah, Mari.
Yeah, I want to see this.
Very intrigued now.
Yeah, I don't know. It is coming out in Nightmare at some point. The story is called Wallers because it really is about walls and wallpaper. I wasn't making that up. And
I know you and I believe you, yes.
It is a story that has a lot of structural fun with it because there's a story, there's nursery rhymes, there's some academic articles, there's a lot going on, but I don't know when it's coming out. I know it is coming out at some point in the future. I just don't have a publication date. What I will instead mention is I discussed the story that had no characters. This is the wrong time of year to plug this story because it's also a Christmas story, but it was published in Uncanny Magazine. It's the North Pole Workshops. As I said, no characters, but have fun with it. And it is very short. Yeah, you should be able to read it in 5 to 6 minutes. So, and it'll give you a nice Christmas in summer feeling, or for if any of you are joining us from the Southern Hemisphere, it'll, fit right into that Southern Hemisphere colder feeling right now.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming, and thanks to all the participants and also the people who came to listen.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you to our interpreters.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yay.
All right.
Absolutely. Bye.
For having us and support OutWrite, support all sorts of little queer publishers out there because it's great and some amazing stuff is being done. So I really urge everybody to go and seek it out because you're going to love it.